Hi everybody, I'm Zilla Blitz and welcome. Today we're going to do a deep dive first look at Grand Havoc from Revolution Games. This is the 8th game in their Blind Swords American Civil War system, and it covers the Battle of Perryville on October 8, 1862. Now this battle, often considered a tactical victory for the South, is loaded with what-ifs and possibilities of things that didn't happen, and the game represents that with a number of scenarios. Let's jump in and take a look. Let's do a quick overview before we open up the game and take a look what's inside. Published in 2023 and designed by Jeff Grossman, this again is Revolution Games' 8th game in their Blind Swords American Civil War system. And again, with this comes all the benefits of once you learn the core rules from one of the games in the system, you're about 70%, probably 80% of the way there to being able to pick up a game, opening up the box, reading the exclusive rules, and then off you go with the new game. So tremendous advantages to systems like this that can make learning the games in subsequent editions of the series much easier. Now, the game has 5 scenarios. One is an introductory scenario, one is the full historical scenario, and then there's 3 variants to that historical scenario. We'll go in and talk about those in details when we look at the exclusive rules book and the scenario book. But the rough length of these full historical battles and then the variants is about 5 hours of historical time, and each turn represents about 20 minutes. So game length wise, you're looking at like 14 to 16 turns for those. Now the first scenario, that introductory scenario, is only 8 turns. And I'm going to guess the gameplay length of these scenarios, maybe an hour for that introductory scenario, a little bit longer, probably 3 hours and some change for the full scenarios. I mean, 14, 16 turns is a pretty, it's a substantial amount of turn amounts, especially with the chit pull system, lots of things going on. So I'm going to guess probably about 3 hours, maybe even potentially 4 hours for some of the larger ones. Units are elements of brigades, so several units will make up one brigade, and a strength point on the unit equals 50 men. A lot of them are like 6, 7, 8 strength points, so we're talking about 300 to 400 men per counter. With all that being said, let's open up the game now and take a look at what's inside. All right, so let's start looking at our pieces here. We've got a red and a white die. We'll talk about those a little bit later. Very short errata sheet. There was a Fog of War chit result table that was missing from the player aid, and then some minor elements here, nothing major to the rules and things like that. But always nice to see that in the box there too, that there's kind of follow-up to things that were a little bit off perhaps with the final production. We've got 2 pieces of documentation. We've got the exclusive rules here for Grand Havoc, and then we have the Blind Swords series rules. And again, as we've mentioned, this is the 10th game. Sorry, this is the 8th game in what is now a 10-game system. And so these are the core rules that are going to be identical across all the games. Which again, I really like this idea of having systems like this because again, once you pick up any other game in this system, you are 70% of the way towards learning the game. Now these are 16 pages long, black and white, not very many graphics in here, but I did read through them except with a couple of places that I felt like I knew already. Very clear. I think Revolution Games has a kind of very high standard they hold towards their rules production. So if I'm reading through these, like questions aren't popping up. I will say also that I am currently playing A Most Fearful Sacrifice, which is a game that is built off of this system but adapted for a larger battle. And as I've been looking through these rules, there's a lot of familiarity with that system. It's kind of almost like Portuguese and Spanish. It's not all the same, but you can say like, oh, okay, this is a little bit different. Okay, this is exactly alike. So I feel like this is a pretty easy learn if you know that game, and vice versa probably as well. A lot of things I really like in here in terms of trying to capture the chaos of combat, and we'll talk about that. Chit pull system, I think overall, I would give this a complexity rating of a 4. It's there's some heft to it and there's some elements to it, but I don't think there's going to be anything that's really going to be overly daunting with this. And again, once you learn this one, you're ready to go with a whole bunch of other games in the series. Now, let's take a look at the exclusive rules here. So these are the ones that are just for the game. Again, 16 pages again. However, the back half of this, pretty much from page 11 on here, are the scenarios. We'll take a look at these momentarily. Now this is in color, and it basically has a lot of the rule adaptations. So for example, stacking is talked about in this Blind Sword series rules, but the unique stacking elements of the game are identified here in the exclusive rules. So this tells you what stacking is, and this tells you exactly what the stacking limit is per hex, because some of the battles, I imagine, are different. This is the first game I've looked at in this system, by the way. But yeah, very nice. So here we have the stacking rules, 12 strength points per system, per hex in this game, so it couldn't be different in a different one. And then we've got just unique rules for this campaign, talking about the unique terrain elements and things like that. So basically bringing to life the uniqueness of the Battle of Perryville in the blind sword system to help people go through. But again, a lot of this overlaps, so I wouldn't look at it as kind of a full 16 plus 10 pages, 26 pages. I feel like there's elements in here that are just re-explained, and so as you read them, you're going to go through them pretty quickly. But yeah, very clean rule set, very clear rule set. I think it's going to be pretty easy to learn. And then in terms of solitaire rating, so if the 4 out of 10 is the complexity, I actually think this system is outstanding for solitaire. And I'll talk a little bit about as we look at the counters and things, but it's just, I think it's going to be a really, really good system for the solitaire gamer. And this, by heart, again, you know, this is built as a 2-player game. It's going to work great as a 2-player game. But if you are a person who likes to play solitaire games, I think this system is going to be really, really fine. And now from having, you know, played the variant or kind of the offshoot of this with the Most Fearful Sacrifice, I also feel like this is a very accessible system. I know some of the Civil War systems can get fairly complex, and nothing against complexity, but I feel like this series is a series that it's going to get to the table because it feels like a very playable system. Let's take a quick look too at the scenarios here. So this is the introductory scenario. It's just 2.5 hours roughly. It's 8 turns to kind of get the system up and learn the game and things like that. Then 16.1 here, the second scenario, is 14 turns, and this is the historical battle. Now historically, the Union had 3 corps at this battle, but the Union first corps was the corps that pretty much did all of the fighting, and they got badly manhandled by the Confederate forces, which historically were outnumbered almost or roughly 3-1 at this battle. So you know, you've got one corps going against one corps, while the Union second corps and third corps historically are fairly inactive during the battle. Now, the variants to this explore the options of that happening in a different way. So here we have, this is 16.3 is an early activation of the Union Second Corps, and what might have happened had that happened. Then the 16.2 is here too. This is the other alternative. This is an early Confederate attack. So the Confederate attack was delayed, and this wonders what happens. Okay, if the Confederate attack happened in the morning instead of in the afternoon, so this one starts at 9 a.m. and goes to 2 p.m. So that's an interesting variant as well. And then our last variant here, which sounds like it would be almost a completely different game than the historical variant, is a coordinated Union attack. I assume this involves all 3 of the Union Corps getting into the action rather than just, for the most part, the Union First Corps doing the lifting in the battle here. So lots of fun variants, and I think, again, this is a battle historically. I'm not too seeped in American Civil War history, but as I was looking up the history for this battle a little bit, one of the things that does become clear is that it does seem like there's so much confusion and speculation about the alternative pathways this battle could have happened, and I really like that the game explores those options and gives a player to check those out in terms of playing through some different alternative histories in the game. So really nice scenario set, I think, in this one here. And now let's take a look at our counters. We have 2 counter sheets here. One mostly has the Union forces on it, and then one with markers, and then the Confederate forces. And again, we can see that roughly in this, at least this force pool here, the counter pool, there's twice as many Confederate forces, twice as many Union forces as Confederate forces here. And so if we take a look now at the Confederate counters here, relatively straightforward. One of the things that surprised me about this is I feel like this is kind of looking through the rules, and again, kind of playing the variant of the system with a Most Fearful Sacrifice here. This feels like a very playable system. There's not a lot of over-reliance on information. You know, these counters, if we take, for example, a look at some of these Confederate counters, the left side is the strength point, and again, one strength point is about 50 men, and the right side is that unit's cohesion, and those factors are pretty much which drive the whole system. You know, you do have shaken units here. We can see you're going to be dropping shaken counters on units. And then the other side, all of these are printed 2-sided. This is where we have another state of disrepair, which is the you know, disrupted units. And then I believe when you flip these over, this is the battle-worn side of the unit. So you're going to have various stages and steps that units are going to take as their battle functionality kind of falls apart here. And we can look down here. This is one element that I really want to talk about because the game mentions this, the 3 FOWs, which is friction of war, and then Fog of War and Fortunes of War. And basically you're going to be having a chit pull system where you're going to be activating certain units based on what chits get pulled out of a cup. But you're also going to be pulling out these kind of FOW chits, these random chits in here that are things like skilled artillery, firing on friends, sharpshooters, rebel yell, rally, that are going to kind of simulate in a really exciting way, I think, the Fog of War, Friction of War, and the Fortunes of War. So it's trying to get at that idea that these battles were incredibly chaotic. You know, for the most part, the Union 2nd Corps and 3rd Corps really didn't know at all what was going on with the 1st Corps while they were getting mauled by the Confederate forces. So a lot of unknowns and friction and smoke and confusion and misrelayed orders and misinterpreted orders, and all that kind of murkiness of the Civil War era comes to life through this chit system. So having seen it played out in Our American A Most Fearful Sacrifice, and I played one scenario of this system at the San Diego Historical Games Convention. I think this does a really marvelous job of that. So I'm really excited to dig into this system more. And so here we can see the Civil War chits down there. And then now if we look at the Union forces, here we can see in the middle, these are the Union chits here that you're going to be pulling out: firefight, rally, brigade, initiative. So all kinds of different options and things that can change the fates and fortunes of each side based on the kind of the randomness and confusion and chaos of Civil War combat. Here we have really nice counters here too. These are all 5/8 of an inch, and again, like the other ones, they're printed on both sides. So really nice job, I think, with these counters in terms of bringing them to life. Let's take a look now at our player aids. There are a fair number of player aids in the box here. These are the Confederate and Union Brigade activation displays. So again, as you're pulling chits out of that, your cup there, you're going to be activating certain elements of your forces, and those are the ones that are going to be able to act. So the sequence of who's going to go and what's going to happen and who's going to go next all plays out in terms of how that battle is going to unfold. I think this too gets at the idea that every time you play this game, because of the different order and the different chits that are in there, not all of those Fog of War chits are in the cup at the same time, and so you don't really know what's going to happen. I think it's going to create a tremendous amount of variety and depth and replayability to the game, because every time you play it, it's going to create kind of a different story, and you're going to be forced to deal with all of the different randomness that happens in the battle too. Here is our time record chart. So this is basically keeping track of the turns. All of the scenarios are based on victory points, and victory points, by and large, I didn't see any that were based on casualties. It seems to be it's really control of victory point locations. So you're trying to achieve certain objectives with the getting your forces to take certain objectives on the map, and that's what's going to dictate victory here. And here we have some Confederate and Union event descriptions. So these are kind of based on these chits. When you pull a rally chit out, these are kind of the instructions for what you do with that different chit, to give you an idea on some of the event descriptions that can happen with those chits and how they get built into the game. And then the back side here, we have our sequence of play, terrain effects charts, brigade order details, and things like that too. And the sequence of play is, is pretty kind of straightforward. You've got you're going to be choosing your event chits and building that draw cup out, and you've got an artillery phase, and then a chit draw phase where you're kind of going through and activating brigades, and then you end the phase. So it's a relatively straightforward system, where I think the nice thing too is that one player is not going to be sitting around for a long time. You're going to be pulling chits out, so you're going to go. You don't know when, but you're going to be going a lot. So you're not going to be waiting for a long time while the other player kind of moves pieces around and does his thing. It's really going to be a back and forth type of experience too. Here we have our combat results table. Basically the strength factor dictating what kind of cohesion checks, and then column shifts and things like that based on various variables that are kind of involved in combat. But this is, I think, a very elegant system. The other thing too about this too, this is volume 8 in the series now. This is a system that's been tried and tested for a number of years now. So not only is it kind of a mature rule set, which is really nice to have, it's also a mature system in terms of tweaking and refining play over the years as well. Here we have our train key and then cohesion test tables. So, and you get 2 of these, one for each player. These are identical as well. And lastly, let's take a look at our map here. So this map is 22 by 34 inches, very standard size map. It is a paper map, kind of a little bit of a semi-gloss paper. It looks like a very kind of a, you know, nice and thick paper as well, printed on one side. So all of your scenarios are going to happen on this side. And it kind of show it zoomed out here too. I really like the map. It's you know, it's got kind of a Rick Barber feel to it. Not, of course, the, you know, that same you know, detail that Rick Barber puts into his maps, but this is a really nice map. I think it's going to be very easy to interpret. Graphics are really easy to see, the way they've built up the hexes and built different elements here. I think it's going to be a very, very playable map. I really like this too. I like the color palette, the kind of brown and the light tan. And I know that water was a factor in this battle too. Like, both armies were extraordinarily dehydrated. And I think it was actually the First Corps that ran into the Confederates trying to get to a river to get water. So, you know, this was perhaps representative, at least this color palette might be representative of what was going on in Kentucky in terms of, I believe there was a drought at that time in the area too. So here we have our map. I really like this. Looks really clean, nice and easy. Now each hex here is slightly over 3/4 of an inch. And again, the units are 5/8. And one hex from side to side represents 150 yards. And then we talked a little bit about strength points and stacking, but it's 12 strength points with some other modifiers and special conditions and things like that that you're going to be able to get to a hex. So mostly, depending upon the size of the unit, you're going to be looking at, I think, a relatively modest stacking amount, maybe 1, 2, perhaps 3 units in a hex, but not very often that many. So I think, again, it's going to be, the whole thing strikes me, the blind sword system, this system, both the size of the game, the size of the hexes, the units, and the sequence of play, and the way you're pulling chits out, it really feels like a system that's going to be, certain games you buy and they don't get to the table, and certain games you buy and they can get to the table a lot. And this feels like, I mean, you know, I played one scenario, I really liked it at the convention. I'm really liking the Most Fearful Sacrifice, which is a variant of the system. You know, I'm relatively new to American Civil War wargaming. Really, this is, you know, I've got limited experience in this with that 25-year gap being away and coming back. I've focused mostly on World War II stuff. But I am so excited to dig into this system now after having gotten a taste of it over the past few months here. So, and if this Civil War game creates interest for you, I'll put a link up to our first look video of A Most Fearful Sacrifice, which you might also be interested in. Different scale, different size game, but again, capturing an amazing battle in the American Civil War. Thanks for watching, everybody.